Taking you now live to Canberra, where the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg is speaking.
That is why it is now more important than ever that we stay the course with considered, disciplined and responsible economic management. Economic management that sees Australia in its 29th consecutive year of economic growth, with a AAA credit rating that only 10 developed nations have, with a strong labour market which has seen more than 1.4 million new jobs being created, and with the first balanced budget in 11 years. And today the IMF has confirmed that the Australian economy will grow faster than any G7 nation except the United States. Now, our economic plan will see the Australian economy continue to grow, with lower taxes, record spending on infrastructure, providing the workforce with the skills that they need, cutting red tape and entering into new free trade agreements, which has already seen businesses have greater access to some 2 billion new customers. And we will ensure a strong economy and a strong budget position, because a strong budget is critical to the economic resilience of the Australian economy as we face these global headwinds.
Treasurer, are you, as Jim Chalmers says, kidding yourself that the Australian economy is actually doing well?
Well, I saw Jim Chalmers today talk about comparing Australia to Greece. This was pathetic, reckless, shameful from a Labor Party which has shown it has no ability to balance the budget. I mean, Greece has an unemployment rate of 20%. Greece has a debt to GDP ratio of around 200%. In fact, the Greek economy is 23% smaller since the GFC, whereas the Australian economy is 33% greater since the GFC. The reality is the Labor Party will look for every political opportunity to talk down the Australian economy and put at risk Australian jobs. That's the comparison.
You're saying stay the course, not change the course in light of growth rates below 2%. Does that mean that you're prepared to accept growth rates below 2%?
Well, let's obviously wait till we see the September national account numbers, but we do know that the Australian economy is facing some significant headwinds. The global headwinds are real, and you've seen that in the IMF report today and their description of a synchronised slowdown. You've seen, obviously, the impact of the drought, which has not only taken more than 0.25% straight off GDP, but has seen significant funding being required from the federal government. So we do face these challenges, but we have lower taxes, putting more money into people's pockets. We have record spending on infrastructure. We have the plan to create 80,000 new apprenticeships, and we're entering into these free trade agreements, which are also ensuring greater opportunities for Australian businesses. So that is our economic plan, and that is a plan that has also seen the budget come into balance for the first time in 11 years.
Treasurer, are you surprised by the fact, like you had Officeworks, Nick Scali, the Reserve Bank noting yesterday in its minutes that there doesn't seem to have been an impact yet from the tax cuts? Are you surprised that that hasn't happened, and do you think that they will eventually start seeing a feed into the economy?
Well, the RBA has pointed out that some people spend the money and some people save the money. There's no surprise in that, but ultimately if you are putting the money into paying down your mortgage, that's going to reduce your interest payments, and ultimately it's a timing question as to when that the rest of the money flows through to the economy from those people who are taking those decisions. But there's no doubt, with more than $20 billion making its way out of the doors of the ATO into the pockets of Australians, that is money that will be being spent with local businesses and in local shopping strips. We also know that the Reserve Bank reducing the interest rates down to a record low of 0.75% has helped stabilise the housing market. We've seen clearance rates jump quite significantly, and we've also seen prices go up in some of the major markets. So in terms of the impact of those tax cuts, they are having an impact, and it will certainly just be a question of timing as to the full impact of them. Catherine.
Why dig in so much on the balanced budget? If the economic conditions in Australia turn down further, presumably the government will stimulate the economy. And aren't you sort of exposing yourself to the Wayne Swan problem? He promised a surplus, an ironclad surplus. Labor wasn't able to deliver it for a range of reasons. Aren't you exposing yourself and the government to the same risk?
Well, surpluses are not ends in themselves. They're not trophies on a cabinet table, Catherine. They're actually an indication of strong budget management and helping to build the resilience in the Australian economy so you can weather those economic shocks. I mean, if Peter Costello and John Howard hadn't paid back Labor's debt, could you imagine the trouble that Labor would have had, more so than they even did, through that GFC? The fact that the coalition left government under Howard and Costello with zero government debt, money in the bank and budget surpluses gave Labor that fiscal flexibility to spend through that cycle when that economic shock hit. So really a strong budget position is not mutually exclusive from having a strong economy. In fact, they come together, and our discipline and the fact that we've seen record job creation and the lowest welfare dependency in Australia in 30 years is actually an indication of good decision making, good economic management, which is going to help protect us into the future.
Just on that
Sorry,
budget,
Andrew, and then Mark.
Treasurer, on that budget surplus, will you do whatever it takes to protect that budget surplus, or do you envisage circumstances, and can you concede the fact there might be circumstances where you have to simply put that dream of yours to deliver that budget surplus a bit further back?
Well, firstly, we've delivered a balanced budget, and that's not insignificant, with the first balanced budget in 11 years, and we're committed to the surplus. But we continue to also ensure that there's spending through the economy with this record infrastructure program, with the tax cuts, and of course monetary policy has helped stabilise the housing market. So it's not an either-or proposition, Andrew. You can have a strong budget position and a strong economy. In fact, the Australian people trust us to deliver that strong budget position because they know when you pay down Labor's debt, you help ensure the economy is more resilient for the economic shocks into the future. Mark.
So you were quoting Peter Costello earlier, Treasurer. Even he says now that monetary policy is having a negligible impact on the economy because rates are so low and it's time to step in with more fiscal policy. Do you have another tranche of fiscal reforms on the way to head off these headwinds coming from overseas?
Well, as I've said to Andrew, Mark, we've provided the most significant tax cuts that Australia has seen in more than 2 decades, and the latest numbers from the ATO show that more than $20 billion has made its way in recent months to the pockets of Australians. We're spending record amounts on infrastructure, shovel-ready projects that are creating tens of thousands of jobs across the economy. We'll provide an update on the budget in MyEFO at the end of the year, and then we'll have the budget next year. And we continue to provide support for new programs and new policies. But
that's a crucial question.
But the point is, we will continue to maintain considered, disciplined, responsible economic management, because that economic management is delivering more jobs and cutting taxes for Australians. We face significant global headwinds. That is the key point out of this IMF report, and Australia is not immune from those headwinds.
Just on the home deposit scheme, Treasurer, just on the home deposit scheme, we saw that pass yesterday,
yes,
but since interest rates cuts have gone through, we've actually seen a trending upwards of house prices, which locks out young people, particularly from buying their first homes. Are you confident that this scheme will actually get more young people into owning their own homes?
Well, it's going to give an opportunity for 10,000 people a year into their housing market. It's an important piece of legislation. It was an election commitment, and it will help those first home buyers with a deposit as little as 5%.
But is it enough? Is it enough?
You were involved as then Minister in the decision to go ahead with Snowy 2.0.
Yeah.
Do you agree that given the changes in technology and the market in the 2 years since then, that there's a case for a new study into its costs and benefits independent of the Snowy board?
Well, I think it's very clear that it will have significant benefits to the Australian energy market, providing power for more than 500,000 homes, helping to stabilise the growing intermittent energy that is coming into the system, particularly wind and solar. And Malcolm Turnbull's absolutely right that there are some vested interests that want to poo-poo this project because it may affect their own particular plans. But the reality is Australia over the years has not provided enough storage in our energy market, and Snowy 2.0 is a nation-building project that will be really important on the eastern seaboard in stabilising our housing market.
Sure. It's another sign that the Australian economy continues to struggle in these global headwinds. You face calls from left, right and centre to fast-track infrastructure projects. We're yet to see one fast-tracked. Why won't you move forward an infrastructure spending program?
We are absolutely prepared to consider bringing forward infrastructure projects, and that's why the Prime Minister wrote to the state premiers. Well, we have $100 billion set aside for an infrastructure plan, and we have now spending around $10 billion a year on infrastructure, which compares to Labor spending about $6 billion a year. And you've got big projects like Melbourne to Brisbane Inland Rail, like WestConnex, like a second airport in Sydney, like Snowy Hydro, and these are absolutely critical infrastructure projects that are creating tens of thousands of jobs. But we will consider bringing forward infrastructure projects on a case-by-case basis. But I do want to point out the reality of some of the capacity constraints that we see in various markets, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney. And you heard even from the Labor Treasurer, Tim Pallas, point out the reality of those capacity constraints, whether it's around skills or whether it's around boring equipment, cement, bitumen, the like. There are significant capacity constraints, and what we agreed among treasurers last Friday here in Canberra was that we would come together and we would share information to try to unlock some of those capacity constraints that we're seeing in the infrastructure sector. John.
We're entering a very unusual period where the RBA may only be one interest rate cut or so away from potentially having to go to QE, i.e. printing money. Are you prepared to let them go down that path rather than fiscal policy playing a role? Because the message I'm getting from you today seems to be the case that you would be.
Well, what we've heard from the Reserve Bank directly, John, in their testimony here in the Parliament recently, was that they see it as unlikely that they would go down the path of unconventional monetary policy. But as you know, as Treasurer and the government, we're responsible for fiscal policy, and it's the independent board of the Reserve Bank that are responsible for monetary policy. So the issue of interest rates will be a matter for them.
Treasurer, you mentioned the US was the only economy doing better than us. So what advice are you going to be seeking from them when you visit the US?
Oh, look, this will be a very important meeting, a good opportunity to meet with my counterparts, to swap notes about the state of the global economy and also about policies that they may be undertaking, and certainly I can share what we're doing here in Australia as a means of ensuring that jobs are being created, lower taxes being provided.
What specific advice are you
it's actually just about swapping notes with key counterparts. I'll be speaking obviously to the US Treasury Secretary and other key counterparts about what is happening in their economies, what is happening in the global economy, as we all strive for the same thing, namely to ensure that our economies are resilient, that more jobs are being created, and that people earn more and keep more of what they earn. Thank you very much.